And new conflicts on the EU's doorstep and around the world have led to increasing numbers of people seeking refuge in the bloc. Last year, the EU received more asylum applications than at any time in the last 7 years. Now, this is according to a new report by the European Union Agency for Asylum. The figures are the highest since the bloc's 2015-16 migrant crisis, when more than 1 million people fled across the EU's borders. Applications decreased in the years that followed, but then rose again. Syrians and Afghan nationals submitted the most applications in 2023, followed by Palestinians and then Turkish nationals. Now, these latest figures don't include the more than 4 million Ukrainians who've been given refuge since Russia's invasion. Germany recorded more than 330,000 asylum applications in 2023, more than any other EU member state. It's followed by France, Spain, and then Italy. Let's see if we can make sense of those numbers with Dr. Raphael Bossong, who's from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Welcome to DW. So we know that the Syrian civil war was the big driver in 2015-16. Is it clear what's behind this current surge?
No, it's a more complicated picture. I mean, it's not one single crisis, apart from the Ukrainian war you mentioned. It's really the whole neighborhood in Europe, which is still, unfortunately, both in terms of violent conflict and in terms of economic and other instability, sort of a source of various sources of irregular migration and asylum seekers. For example, Turkey, you mentioned here, is a new development. And why is that? Well, on the one hand, yes, Erdogan is having an autocratic regime and there is more political repression, but also in general, there's the lack of economic perspective, a lack of a general, sense that Turkey is going in the right direction. So it's a mixture of those factors. And Afghanistan, you mentioned, is a long-running conflict, of course. And people are moving from Afghanistan or seeing that they don't have a regional perspective and eventually arrive in Europe. So all these movements take time. And so this is what we see sort of accumulating in the last year. So we have a structural problem indeed, yes.
So nationalist parties and far-right governments in Europe have long capitalised on public discontent over migration and asylum. So are these figures likely to fuel that?
I don't think the figure themselves make a big difference. I mean, the discourse has been going on for quite some time. I think the current sort of political debate is more, okay, what are we going to do about this? And what are the sort of proposed solutions? So on the one hand, mainstream parties are saying, okay, we agreed on this EU reform for sort of a more stringent asylum system, more order. And other actors are now saying, no, this is not enough. We have to take more radical action, so more forceful kind of border closures, or even putting people only in third countries for having their asylum process. So I think this is more the divide than, the exact numbers of people arriving.
And why does Germany appear to be such a magnet?
Well, Germany still is, has a reputation to some extent for being open. And this is what also happened in the case of Ukraine. It still has, a large and actually needy labor market, so there are prospects. And then, of course, last but not least, there are always these kind of diaspora effects. So Syrians, there are already a lot of Syrians in Germany, so further people from Syria who take refuge in Europe, they obviously try to go somewhere where they may know somebody. So coupled, this is like why Germany is still the biggest recipient.
Okay. So we have many European countries facing falling birth rates and a diminishing pool of workers, and yet countries like Germany, Italy, are doing deals with countries like Morocco and Albania are trying to do deals with countries like Rwanda and Albania to process asylum seekers abroad, while Germany at the same time is doing deals with Morocco to try and encourage people. So it looks like they're trying to welcome with one hand and slap people away with the other.
Yeah, there is an inconsistency. I mean, some official spokespeople would say, well, there is no contradiction. We just want to control who's coming. We want to choose who's coming here, and this should be for economic migrants and not for irregular migrants. But of course, you can't sort of neatly separate the two. So if you get a reputation as being as nasty as possible, then it's obviously not as likely that you can attract the kind of labor migration and the skilled people you want. In Germany, I think we're not that far down the line in trying to be just, deterrent, like the debate in the UK is, or is actually also increasingly happening in Italy. But we'll see. I mean, the elections, or European elections, will be a test for that. And certainly we should be careful that we really don't destroy this kind of attraction of Germany, because that's what we really need in the long term.
And so ever since 2015-16, when we saw this surge from Syria, the EU has been debating what to do about irregular migration, and clearly the system that was in place, the Dublin rule where people are processed at the point of entry, doesn't work. Why has it taken so long to sort this out? Because a deal was finally arrived at in December of just last year.
Well, I mean, actually, it is fiendishly difficult to explain that. It took 8 years, and one of the reasons, not the only one, was obviously this debate about solidarity. So what is the kind of measure for supporting each other in Europe? And originally, there was always this idea that we relocate people across Europe, and various countries, first and foremost in Eastern Europe, but not only, increasingly sort of said, no way, we're not going to do this. And eventually, also countries like Germany settled on, okay, we're going to have a flexible system of solidarity. So more or less, countries can choose what they kind of put into a common pool, and then somehow this is politically more palatable. And the second element that kind of was a deal breaker is the kind of idea that we now at least try to have more sort of faster and stringent asylum procedures near the external borders. So people ideally should be processed fast and returned if they don't get asylum. So these two ideas, sort of flexible solidarity and sort of more stringent procedures with faster returns on the borders, are meant to create both more control and more political sort of flexibility. But whether it's going to work in practice, this is a big question that we can actually not really sort of really say at this point in time.
OK, thanks for talking us through that, Dr. Raphael Bossong from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Thank you.
Welcome.